Hey guys, and welcome to the channel. I'm Zemo, the dad in DPS, and today we're talking builds. And today's build is a full health commando build that has two different modes that can be used in the wider Appalachia, but more importantly, in raids. Now, if you enjoy these videos, don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and yeah, let's get on with the video. So the first part of the build is going to be the legendary perks. Now I'm using it in both modes. We have a crit mode and a hipfire mode, and in both modes we're using the exact same legendary perks. And the reason that I'm using these is I found a lot of the legendary special perks just provide more utility to me. They provide more benefit. And the reality is a lot of these perks just don't matter anymore for the most part. Ammo Factory obviously is great for making ammo, so you know, not something you'd use in combat. We've got these two, just I don't find any use to them. That one's a melee one, that one's a grenade one, so they don't matter in the build. That one's a power armor one, so it doesn't matter. That's a melee one. This one triggers on killing. Now, these are big bosses that I'm typically going up against, so I'm not killing things that often, and when it's dead, it's dead. There's nothing to damage. You can't sneak in here. Funky Duds I just don't use. Hack and Slash is melee. Master Infiltrator is irrelevant. Power Armor, melee, crap, irrelevant. There's no fire damage in here. This one, why? Taking one for the team is one that could be valid, but at the same time, am I being targeted by the enemy more than enough to justify this like extra damage? I'd rather take a perk slot that is going to give me permanent benefits. This might work 1 out of 4 of the times, and this is the kind of thing, 1 in 4 chance of getting this damage buff is kind of like, why? What's the point? Genuinely, what's the point? So we've opted for all legendary specials, and technically there are free perk points essentially up for grabs in the build in some way, shape or form, but I didn't think it was really that relevant to the circumstance to warrant talking about today. So the first thing we're going to cover is the Vats crit build of this, and as you can see, this is the perks that we've got. We've got 6 in strength, 10 in perception, 15 in endurance, charisma has 12, intelligence has 1, agility has 2, and luck has 10. And you'll notice that endurance is my dump stat. So anytime I have excess points that I can move, they will get dumped into endurance. After that, if you had more dump stat, I'd probably drop them in luck or agility. But, you know, that's what we're dumping them into. And the result of that, if we go to the perks, is that we have 8 strength perk points, 15 in perception, 15 in endurance, 12 in charisma, 6 in intelligence, 7 in agility, and 15 in luck. Our perks being strong back, bandolier, and blocker in strength. Tank killer, maxed out, and the free commando is maxed out, as well as concentrated fire maxed out. Now, you could opt for putting 1 in concentrated fire and 2 in ground pounder. That is entirely down to you, but this is what I'm using. Then in endurance, we have 2 in Life Giver, 1 Natural Resistance, 1 Iron Stomach, 2 Rejuvenated, 2 Solar Powered, 1 Starch Dreams, 2 Through Hiker, 1 Vaccinated, 1 Adamantium Skeleton, 1 First Quencher, and the last in Photosynthetic. In Charisma we have Strange in Numbers, Tenderizer, Team Medic, Suppressors, and Field Surgeon. In intelligence, we have batteries included and first aid. Now, the thing about this, we do have the legendary intelligence perk, and this bumps us up to 6 intelligence. The problem with that is I don't really have anything I really want to use in here, apart from maybe Demolition Expert on the odd occasion. But at the same time, it is vital for the other mode, which is why I have it in there. But at the same time, it doesn't detract anything from the build, because the reality is, all I would do with those free intelligence points is put them into a dump stat where I'm not really going to use it all that much. So it is kind of what it is. It's an unneeded free perks, but it's good to have it instead of, well, it's good to have it for the other mode, basically. So that is, you know, if you were only going to use this mode, then you don't need the legendary intelligence, basically. Then we have Action Girl, Born Survivor, and Evasive in the agility tree. And last but not least in luck, we have 4-Leaf Clover, Class Freak, Ricochet, Good with Salt, Better Criticals, Serendipity, and Critical Savvy. Now, the entire gist of this build is to optimize the amount of crits we can do, as well as minimize the amount of damage we take. There are perks in here that are filler, like things like photosynthetic, but they do add a little bit of survivability at certain times and periods throughout the day. So they are valuable in a sense, but not necessary. It's just, you know, endurance is such a good stat now that I dump everything extra I can into it. And, you know, sometimes you don't have perks that you're really wanting to use. So the next thing we're going to talk about is armor. And essentially, you will see all my armor pieces have all the same stuff on there. And the main reason for that is Overeaters, Endurance, and Sentinels give us incredible survivability. Overeaters and Sentinels, I don't think I need to go into. But the reason we are stacking so much Endurance is because of the perks in our Endurance tree. A lot of them give you armor buffs, elemental resistance buffs, increased AP, increased HP. This then means if we stack Endurance, we're going to get an increase to all of these things. We are getting more AP, we're getting more HP, and we're getting more armor. That is why I'm stacking so much Endurance. I'm not going into each individual perk and discussing them, because the build is the build. You know, you can test it and see for yourself how well it works. But when it comes to this armor, the most important factor is the 4-star. Now, we are using limit breaking, which reduces the cost of our crits, which allows us to crit just about every other hit. And the great thing about that is that if we are constantly critting, we are constantly doing the maximum amount of damage that we can do, and it does ramp up pretty quickly. It is a very good build for a full health commando to use, because you can maximize your damage to whatever you need it to be without having to use the meta weapons. But I find it quite fun. On top of that, we are also using solar armor, which has the interesting effect of giving plus 4 HP when you've got the full set on to you and nearby teammates when your health is above 60. Now, because I'm so tanky, that is quite often, which means we're actually helping our teammates regenerate health as this goes on. So yeah, it is a decent armor set. I find it quite interesting and I enjoy using it. Now, this next portion is talking about our mutations and our stats. Now, I'm not going to go over this again for the other side of the build, because it's very similar stats, and the mutations for the most part are exactly the same. But what we are currently using in terms of mutations are Bird Bones, Carnivore, Eagle Eyes, Egghead, Herd Mentality, Marsupial, and Speed Demon. On top of that, we are using things that are buffing our AP regen, and things like Pemmican for more endurance, Company Tea, and Perfect Bubblegum to get that damage resistance. But this is just an idea to show you what we are kind of using, and see the stats that you're going to see on this build. It is very similar with the other one. There will be slight changes, but it's pretty much exactly the same. So take in mind, that's what we're using, that's our stats, that is our mutations for both of these modes. Now, the rest of my buffs pretty much come from the things that you see here. You're seeing that we have a Mirelurk Steamer, where I'm just going to grab everything out of here, and we have our Deathclaw Roaster. And literally, most of my buffs come from these items. And I'm just literally grabbing everything I can to get as much HP and as much AP, as much damage as possible. But there are other buffs that we do use. Now, there are other food buffs you can use. For example, there's the canned coffee, which can allow you to spam the living crap out of Vats. I don't tend to use it because I'm lazy. There's also Company Tea that gives you the AP regen, which is absolutely fantastic. If you're not using that, you really should be. Then we have Pemmican, which I forgot to mention. It's one of the producers that I have in my camp. Gives you 6 endurance. Absolutely fantastic item, especially if you are a meat eater. Then we have Perfect Bubblegum, which gives our Overeater armor pretty much its constant buff, which is absolutely fantastic. And the last thing for this mode of the build, in the other mode it does not matter in the slightest, Sweet Mutfruit Tea, because it gives us additional crit damage, which is absolutely fantastic for this version of the build. Now, the last set of buffs that I want to cover are very situational and depend on the type of weapon and things that you're using. But we are talking about your magazines. Now, for example, we have, where's the magazines and the Bobbleheads? We've got Guns and Bullets, which just, Guns and Bullets free, which boosts our ballistic crit damage. Now, this is really good to use on this weapon, because it is a ballistic weapon. But there are other ones that you can use, like there's Tesla Science, I think it's 8, yeah. Tesla Science 8 that boosts crit damage by 50%. Now, it's really up to yourself what you want to use in these. It really depends on what you're using in general. And different magazines do different things. So you have to kind of pick and choose what you want to use. But I'm going to use the Guns and Bullets free because I'm not really sure which one is more usable. There's also the Bobblehead buffs, which can give you a variety of different things. If you want more luck, you can get more luck. If you want more intelligence, you can get more intelligence. You want more bloomin' energy damage, you can get more energy damage. Use the one that is relevant to you. Today, I will probably use the small guns one, just to get the damage out of it, just to show you the kind of max output that I'm going to have. But normally, I wouldn't use these because, quite frankly, I feel it's a waste. I'd rather turn them into the Armskeeper 3-star mod because, you know, they're more valuable to me. But that's really up to yourself what you want to use with that. As time goes on and we get more and more bobbleheads and we pretty much have too many of them, maybe I'll change my mind on that. But typically I wouldn't use that buff. And once again, these buffs are all relevant on any of the modes of the build today. Obviously, I'm not going to use the one that increases crit damage on freaking the other set of the build, but you know, buffs are buffs. They're relevant depending on what I use. I'll be using something is the gist of it. Now, the main weapon that I use in this build is the Dying Scotsman, a quad crit action point, pinpointers, railway rifle. Now, this weapon does incredible damage, and you could, in theory, use just about any rifle in the position this. It's just the railway rifle has some of the best damage in the game, an excellent fire rate, and just does what I need it to do. You could, in theory, use handmaids, fixers, all those kind of things, but this is what I am using for this build. And so the big question becomes, how does the build perform in general? Now, there's the 3 bosses that I would mainly concern myself. There's the robot, the 3 guys, and the snake. And in terms of damage, it is actually a really, really good weapon. On the first boss fight, you're hitting the fusion core for around about 80 to 500, 600-ish, depending on crits, depending on things triggering, so on and so forth. Then when you're hitting the actual boss, it can ramp all the way up to about 3,000 damage. So yeah, you can do some pretty hefty hits on the first boss and help take him down pretty damn quick. Then when it comes to the 3 Stooges, the issue with their boss fight is that quite often if people are using pounders, weapons, flamers, that kind of thing, they get close to them and they can block your line of sight with Vats. So your damage is great, you're doing anywhere between 200 and 900 on average, but it can ramp up all the way to doing like 900 to 2,000, 3,000-ish. But it depends on, again, things triggering, things happening, all that kind of thing. But essentially, like, you're better off in this fight either watching for iBots with your Vats or, you know, bringing a flamer, swapping to something like that. But the railway rifle does definitely do some major damage, but I think with the current meta and the way things work, you're better off with pounders, weapons and things like that, no matter what you're using, no matter what build. So I'm not really going to go into that. But then when you come to the snake, you are doing some pretty hefty damage. On average, I was doing 1,200 to his eye, and the crits were doing anywhere between 2,000 to 3,000. I at one point saw a 5,555 crit, so that was quite fun. But you are doing some pretty big numbers against the snake, so it is one of those kind of things where you will be able to take down bosses quite easily using this build. And on the note of it, a friend of mine, Kenobi, was also using this build because he pinched it off of me, and he was using a handmade, and he said he was getting similar numbers, not quite as high, but with the handmade having a better fire rate and a better kind of ammo capacity depending on what you're using, it could actually be a sleeper weapon to use, which I'll test in the future. Now, I did promise people a different build on here, and that is the alternate mode that I call Hipefire. Now, this is for people who don't want to use Vats or crits, and unfortunately, it is inferior in damage, but it is a fun way to play. Like, I do enjoy playing this way. Now, in terms of the basic stats, we have 6 strength, 10 perception, 15 endurance, 12 charisma, 3 intelligence, 5 agility, 5 luck, and that translates into us having 8 in strength, 15 perception, 15 endurance, 12 in charisma, 8 in intelligence, 10 in agility, and 10 in luck. Now, the main changes are in the perception, intelligence, agility, and luck tree, because the other 3 don't have any changes. Strength, endurance, and charisma are identical to the first build. In perception, we've swapped around concentrated fire for ground pounder, which gives us, fire accuracy and reload. In the intelligence tree, we have added the free science perks, which buffs one of our main weapons, and we've lost first aid, but we also have more intelligence as well. In the agility tree, we have put on dodgy. We will not be using our AP for the most part, so dodgy is actually incredibly great for this build, and it makes this far more survivable than the other version of this build. This is tankier than the first variant, so if there's something that you're struggling to survive against, this might actually work better for you. Then in the last tree, we have removed a lot of luck perks, so we have Bloodied Mess instead, Good with Salt, Class Freak, and Ricochet. But for the most part, it's very similar to how the other build was built. All the endurance perks are all pretty much the same. This is a very tanky version. Because evasive and dodgy can both trigger, it actually makes you take a lot more damage than you would normally in the previous version of the build. Next up, we have the armor for this build, and pretty much it's identical to the armor that we used for the previous one, with one change. The 4-star is Rangers. Now, what this gives us is 5% bonus damage per piece when using a ranged weapon, giving us extra 25% damage. Granted, it's not the best effect in the world, but for this type of build, we're not relying on Vats crits, so any extra damage we can get is the best way to go. Now, I've said before that the buffs and the kind of things you use on this build are near identical. So the buffs, the stats, all the kind of things you saw were pretty much exactly the same. So I'm not going to go over them again. If you have skipped forward this part, skip back to the food buffs and the buffs that I would recommend using on this build. But what we're going to do is go straight into the weapons. Now, there's 2 ones that we can use. There is the Moon Shoveler, which is a quad weapon speed, reload speed, bullies, V63 carbine. Now, in theory, at the moment, pinpointers is still technically better than this, because pinpointers is working outside of Vats, whereas this is only working inside the realm of hip firing and manual aiming. But I'm using it anyway. That's what we're using. This is a very good weapon, very stable, very good at hitting any point that you want on an enemy, so it is incredibly good for this build and just generally not using Vats. Then we also have the Orient Express, which is a quad ammo capacity, damage while aiming, reload speed, stabilizers, railway rifle. Now, railway rifles can now be used fairly confidently outside of Vats, but they still move around quite a bit. But with stabilizers, this thing is like a laser. This is very, very fun to use and just an interesting weapon to play with in general. So obviously this mode works very differently. Now, first off, I'm going to say that the V63 and the railway rifle are 2 viable weapons, but the V63 overall across the board just completely slaps the railway rifle about. It is the far superior option, and when you get up to the point where it's overheating, it does ridiculous amounts of damage in comparison to the railway. On top of that, it's just got a massive fire rate increase on top of that, and it just feels better. That being said, I do enjoy using the railway, but the V63 is the king in this build altogether. Now, the main thing I'd say about this build is that it is tanky. It is very, very tanky. You can use dodgy and stand directly in front of the robot, and he can't really do much against you. As a result, most of the enemies in this entire dungeon can't do much against this version of the build. If there was some way to, deliberately draw aggro to this guy, he would just sit there laughing as everybody shoots into the back of different things. It is one of those things where I wish there was some sort of tank weapon where you could draw aggro, but that is what it is. Now, when it comes to the rest of the raid against the Three Stooges, you do slightly get more damage per shot out of the railway rifle in comparison to the V63, but I still think the V63 pips this to the post. Just the sheer amount of shots coming out of it, and the damage isn't that drastically different. I just feel like it's much, much better. And the same can be said in the end boss fight, where the V63 not only does more damage, but it just sustains fire, and it just feels better to use. Overall, when using this build, and this version of the build, I don't really struggle against anything. I do damage, I do, you know, in some cases better damage than the randoms that end up in my teams and things like that. But I will say that the original and first build in here, the crit one, is just far superior in terms of what you can do damage-wise. This is just something that you can use when you're bored of using the exact same thing, for the same reason that this build is inferior in an extent to power armor builds at the moment, with the Gatling plasma being one of the best weapons in the game currently for raids. This is kinda like in that same sense, where this is an inferior version of the Commando build. But, you know, it's not all about damage. Sometimes it is about survivability, and this build does have survivability in spades. There is very little that's going to take you down while you're using this. So yeah, that was today's video and quote-unquote builds. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to leave a like, a comment, and subscribe. If you have any questions, I urge you to leave them down in the comments for definite. But yeah, what did everybody think? Either way, guys, I'll catch you all next time in the Wasteland.
In a world that's broken, oh so fine, Bethesda built this sweet design, where ghouls and super mutants sway to doo-wop rhythms night and day. In Diamond City's neon glow, the radio plays tunes we know from the pre-war days to now. It's a doo-wop dream, I'll tell you how. Swinging through the ruins, love's not lost. In every nook, in every frost, we dance, we laugh, we reminisce in this post-apocalyptic bliss. Bottle caps may be our goal.